This is Radio VR in Washington. I'm Kells Heatherington. My guest is Craig Holman. He is the government affairs lobbyist for Public Citizen, which is a D.C.-based think tank. Thanks for coming into the studio, Craig.
Glad to be here.
Well, we wanted to have you here today to talk about the Supreme Court's decision, which was passed down on Wednesday, that removes the limits on the total amount of money individuals can give to candidates, political parties, and political action committees. The court said this was unconstitutional. Does this mean now that you can give as much money as you want to a person running for Congress or to a presidential candidate?
It means that the very wealthy people can give as much money as they can to all candidates, political committees, and political parties combined. On a realistic level, if you take a look at how many candidates run for office, how many political party committees there are, the total amount in pragmatic terms works out to about $5.9 million will be how much any wealthy individual can now contribute. It can't go just to one candidate. In giving that kind of $5.9 million, it has to go to what will be called after yesterday, a super joint fundraising committee. So what's going to happen is you'll have people like Speaker John Boehner organizing a joint fundraising committee that includes all 430 candidates running for House on the Republican side, the national Republican parties, all 50 state Republican parties, and perhaps the leadership PACs for all those lawmakers in the House. And put it all together, combined, that'll amount to a $5.9 million check. So a wealthy individual will walk in, shake hands with John Boehner, and hand him $5.9 million.
Now, how many individuals are able to do something like that? That's a lot of money, $5-some-odd million, right?
That's a lot of money, but there are some individuals that do that. To try to get a clue as to how many this is going to be, in the United States, I think the population is something like 310 million people. Of those 310 million, we've identified 646 people who have actually reached the aggregate contribution limit of 123,200. So we're talking about 600 people. This whole Supreme Court decision, this McCutcheon decision, is just unbelievable. I mean, what it's all about is vesting special privileges and rights to millionaires, only to millionaires. It doesn't include the rest of us.
Well, because we don't have the money to spend, obviously. I mean, we could.
Because we don't have the money to spend. So we're just talking about people who can chip in $5.9 million. And that's not a whole lot of people.
Now, the executive director of a group called MoveOn.org lambasted the Supreme Court's decision, saying it has, quote, seriously threatened our democracy by allowing, as you say, the ultra-rich people in America, like the Koch brothers, to effectively buy as many members of Congress as their bank accounts allow. What I'm curious to know from you, as you watch these elections and how money impacts them so closely, how important is money in a congressional race?
Money is critical for the election of members of Congress as well as the president. And even in cases where perhaps money does not prevail, every candidate and every lawmaker believes it will. So however truly effective money is in buying elections is only a secondary consideration. What matters most is that everyone running, every lawmaker and every politician believes it will buy elections. So if you can hand over, millions of dollars to any one lawmaker or candidate or politician, they are going to be forever indebted. So the issue isn't so much does money actually succeed in buying elections. The issue is money going to buy obligation from those who are in Congress? And yes, it is going to.
So truth be told, the money spent on a campaign doesn't actually studies have found that the amount of money spent on a campaign does not typically influence who is going to win or lose the particular election. Is that what you're saying?
No, not quite. It's hard to come up with an accurate political science assessment of how effective money is. In a very simple term, we know that the candidate who spends the most wins about 95% of the time.
And as you say, it doesn't always dictate the outcome of the election, but it makes the person, the candidate who is getting this $5.9 million, absolutely beholden to the campaign contributor. Can you cite some specific examples of where there has been a quid pro quo relationship that has caught the media's attention or maybe has not?
Well, quid pro quo is very difficult to prove. And, unfortunately, that's the standard that the Supreme Court is now putting us on. But there have been cases of it. I mean, Congressman William Jefferson, for instance, was caught with $90,000 in cash that a business conglomerate gave to him that he stuffed in his freezer. And that is a quid pro quo. Now, quid pro quo, though, it requires something like an FBI sting operation or finding $90,000 stuffed in your freezer to try to prove. Where it is more damaging is the much more subtle influence, and that is the wink and the nod. You hand over $5 million to the Speaker of the House, and he doesn't have to say he's going to deliver for you. He just, thanks you very much, and then he does deliver for you.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, along with some other GOP leaders, have said that the decision Wednesday from the Supreme Court is going to loosen the political party system's hold on candidates. Do you think that is so?
It is not going to benefit the political parties. And this is one thing I agree with Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, by the way, supports the McCutcheon decision. But he is accurate when he says this really isn't going to make the political parties stronger. And the reason is exactly of how buying favors works. If a very wealthy individual wants to hand over a couple $1 million in the hope of getting a government contract secured from Congress, you don't really want to give it to some outside group or even a political party or party bosses. You want to hand it over directly to the person who can deliver those contracts to you. And that will be lawmakers, and preferably the congressional leadership. That's who the big donors are. Those 646 people, that's who they're going to start handing the checks over to. It will not be going to the parties.
It seems to me that this would hurt the candidate trying to get in the race for the first time. The small-town lawyer who has decided that he is going to run for Congress, who the party might look at and say, this is a guy we want to support, but who major business executives in the state might not see as a real contender yet. Isn't that who it's going to hurt? The guys who are the up-and-coming folks?
It's not only going to hurt the up-and-coming candidates, but it's also going to hurt most Americans who can't afford to chip in very much. Over the last couple election cycles, largely led by President Obama, we've seen a trend of smaller donors actually making a difference. People who could chip in $20 or $40, and it added up in supporting President Obama. But now when you take away this aggregate contribution limit of $123,000, you're not going to see candidates trying to go out to us average Americans and try soliciting $20. I mean, that's just not going to be the focus. And at the same time, you are absolutely right. The candidates who are not the recipients of these multi-million-dollar checks are going to be drummed out. So it's going to hurt the small donor. It's going to hurt the candidate who can't muster millions of dollars to run for office.
Final question for you, Mr. Holman. How do you think Congress responds to what has happened at the Supreme Court?
That is the $6 million question right here. I mean, we're trying to figure out how we can deal with this Supreme Court, given that it's just 5 justices, and the same 5 who keep striking down all our limits on money and politics, and they're ready to strike down the last vestiges of the campaign finance law we have. How can we deal with that? One would be hoping that soon the Supreme Court's going to change, that one of those 5 justices are going to retire, and all we need is one appointment to the Supreme Court, and we can reverse all the damage that the Roberts Court has done. Another is a constitutional amendment, and I've just been spending the last 2 days in a number of McCutcheon meetings working with lawmakers, trying to get them to agree on one single constitutional amendment so we can reverse the damage that these 5 justices have done. So, we're exploring the possibilities right now.
Do you think that Americans across the country are really aware of what's going on?
They are becoming aware. Do you know, yesterday, right after the McCutcheon decision, there were 150 demonstrations in 41 states, organized just by citizens opposing the McCutcheon decision and all the damage that the Roberts Court has done. Americans are becoming aware. Citizens United is something, for instance, the original court decision that caused most of the damage. Most Americans are aware of that Citizens United decision. And even though McCutcheon came upon everyone quickly and almost silently until yesterday, I believe Americans are figuring this out. Americans really do want to rein in the abuse of money in politics, and they do support and will support a constitutional amendment. The trick is trying to get a constitutional amendment through this Congress, submitted to the states so the states can ratify it.
Well, how did this decision go so undetected until yesterday?
It's a very subtle type of campaign finance law decision. I mean, when you talk about aggregate contribution limits, most people don't even understand what aggregate contribution limits mean. So it's a very technical type of decision. I mean, Public Citizen, Common Cause, other groups have been on top of this and trying our best to educate the American public on the ramifications of this decision. But it's pretty hard to explain to America a technical campaign finance law case.
Well, thank you very much, Craig, for coming on the radio and talking about this.
A pleasure. I'm glad you invited me.
My guest has been Craig Holman from Public Citizen, where he is the government affairs lobbyist. I'm Kells Heatherington in Washington for Radio VR.